So me and Ben have got here to the pavilions of Harrogate at the Yorkshire Showground for the Future Farmers of Yorkshire evening that she's going to be on.
Get a suntan walking in.
Rising inflation and how it's going to affect us as farmers. So yeah, see how it goes. Should be interesting. Oh, this is where they have the VIP, isn't it, at Yorkshire Show?
You still don't
Well, it's not VIP, is it? It's what do they call it? Members area.
No, been.
I have once. They're in the Derwent room. There we go. Getting some food down us. Some different size cameras compared to my iPhone here. I'm just going to have a quick word with Izzy, who's going to be doing some speaking. I think it's one of the first times she's done it. She's feeling very nervous, so I'll ask her about it. How are you feeling about it all, Izzy?
Honestly, I need like 4 more of these.
Yeah, you'll do great. You'll be fine. Once you get up there, you'll be fine.
No, honestly, once I get up there, it'll probably be alright. But right now, nerves are bad. I feel like I need to sit down. I need a bit of heat. It's too hot. It's too much.
That's brilliant. So we've got Mark, the head of the HSBC. Nick, chairman of Future Farmers, just here, checking his phone. Is he feeling very nervous at the front though?
Hello, everyone.
Hello!
Hi. I've never wanted a glass of water to be a double gin and tonic more so. Good evening everyone and welcome to the Future Farmers of Yorkshire Autumn Debate. I'm going to pass on to the first speaker, and I was a bit worried I wasn't going to have anything to say, but obviously that couldn't happen. So, our first speaker of the night is Mark Beresford-Smith. Mark studied economics and... What?
Don't read all that.
Okay. Mark doesn't need all that. So, we're moving on. Right.
Evening, everybody. Evening. Suffice to say, the war in Ukraine has pretty much upended everything that we'd expected as we moved out of the pandemic. It's changed the world. In many respects, you have to think of it like the 1970s. You remember the Yom Kippur War, the Arab-Israeli War of October of that year. Now that war, in fact, didn't last for very long, but had a profound effect on the global economy because it quadrupled the price of oil. Well, the war in Ukraine has done, well, it's not done a great deal to the price of oil, to be honest, but it's done a heck of a lot to the price of gas. And ultimately, the economic consequence is much the same. The day that war started, it was absolutely obvious that what it would do to the global economy would be to slow growth and increase inflation. And that is the world that we are going to live in until the war finishes and until its consequences are dealt with. Now, even if it finishes, I'm not sure how much difference it makes because I can't imagine any scenario where we ever buy a lot of gas from Russia again. We might buy some, but we're not going to buy anything like what we ever did. And it's going to be 3-4 years before we see any significant new gas on the global market. So this is something we're likely to live with. All of us are in much the same boat. You know, if you're a country that uses gas, imports gas, then you're all in the same boat. You're going to pay the same price for it. It doesn't make any difference. We're all dealing with the same stuff. And so there isn't going to be a lot of growth around the world. Economies are not going to grow very much. They might go into recession this winter. They probably will, but even when they come out next year, it's not going to feel noticeably different. It's not going to feel noticeably different until this war finishes, and until we deal with the consequences. I don't give you any good news. I'm giving you tons of good news. Good news. The biggest rate hikes are now behind us. I would be surprised if we get more 75s out of the Americans and the Europeans. I'd be surprised if we get more 75s out of the Bank of England. We did get a couple last week, but smaller central banks, Sweden, and I think it was New Zealand. So the biggest ones are behind us. What they will now aim to do is to get rates to where they think will be enough to tame inflation, and they'll get them there early next year. They'll leave them there for a while to see if it does the job, and they'll hope the goodness that it does do the job. Because if it doesn't, then we'll be in more big trouble about this time next year. Next one, please. Food and energy. What they've done to our inflation rate in the UK. The most obvious one is the gas and electricity prices. Went up 54% in April, went up another 28 or so in October. We've got another 25 coming next April once domestic users. That's obviously had a big impact on our inflation. More to the point, something that used to be only 2% of our spending has now rapidly morphed into 5 or 6% of our spending. That's 3% of our spending that we would have once done on something else that now has to go on gas and electricity. Or if you're lucky, you can draw down some of your savings. Food has had another big impact. Food and drink inflation, 16%. That's about a tenth of our household spend. That one matters too. Between them, they've contributed about between 4 and 5% of our inflation. We also note that our inflation rate is 11, so they're not even half. Something else has done the rest. Next one, please. This, of course, has impacted, farming sector, especially in terms of food prices. But what I would say, and in slight contrariness to what was said at the start, is that actually you have done pretty well in passing these prices on. There was all this mantra during the low inflation times that, oh, crikey, what would ever what would ever happen if we ever got inflation again, because nobody would know how to put up their prices because they've never done it. Absolute rubbish. Or all I can say is they learn pretty fast. Whether that be agriculture, whether that be manufacturing, who did even better, they have learned pretty fast how to get price increases away. Now, I grant you, it is very hard for some, much harder for some than it is for others. But across the board, and I can only talk across the board, the sector has done pretty well in getting its price increases away. And in terms of that measure of farm profitability that the government produced in total income from farming, I reckon this year is going to look pretty good, as will next year. The sector is going to earn fairly good profits. Now, I grant you it's not the same for everybody, so we'll have a quick look at those. Output prices, the ones that are good, you'll know them. You don't need me to tell you though. This is for my edification, not for yours. You would know this. And then the bad ones. So not so great if you're in chickens, and not so great if you're in lamb. And a huge difference between the ability of some parts of this industry to get its price rises away or not. Next one. So that's the inflation that's come from food. Are not keeping pace. And you might think, we've had inflation before, surely we've had these real wage shocks before, surely we've had these cost of living squeezes before. No, we haven't. Because back in the 1970s, you had all those nice men, and they were all men. Remember old Jack Jones and old Hugh Scanlon and Frank Chappell and Arthur Scargill? They'd go and get big pay rises, often inflation busting. And the rest of us would pile in afterwards. So long as you were working, inflation could be whatever it might be, but you did not suffer. Your standard of living did not fall. It was an absolute disaster if you were on a pension, but otherwise we were all fine. Nowadays we are not. Wages have done quite well, but it's still 6% wage growth paying 11% inflation. That's a big squeeze. Now, about a third of the population has sat on a ton of cash that they saved during the pandemic, but quite a few of the rest have sat on nothing. And that's why we're having the problems. And we will have a recession, and it will last until that gap closes. However it closes, whether it's because wages increase or because inflation comes down. Until that gap closes, we'll have a recession. And if it opens up again, because the Bank of England's had to put up interest rates a second time, if it opens up again the back end of next year, early 24, then we'll have a second recession, like we did in the 1970s. The key is what happens in our labour market. Does it ease or does it not? Do people still have wage bargaining power to try and get close to that inflation number? So move the side and look at the labour market. Yeah, and it's starting to loosen. We've now got only 1.2 million vacancies as opposed to nearly 1.3 million. Big deal. Before the pandemic, you wouldn't have ever seen a number bigger than 850,000. That's the degree of which this market needs to tighten. And it started, but it's very slow, and it will progress. Firms will lay people off. And maybe even people will join the labour market as they get off their long COVID sick beds, as their mental health improves, as they get out of the NHS backlogs, whatever. It will sort itself out, but it may not be quick. The question is, in the meantime, what does that do to earnings growth? And therefore, does that prolong inflation still further? So the big message is that inflation is likely to ebb from here, but it won't be quick. And we'll still have significant inflation throughout next year and probably through the year after. Final one, what does it all mean for interest rates? Well, it rather depends on how successful we are in tackling the inflation. Let's assume we're successful. Listening to what the Bank of England said at the start of November, and the fact that that big increase was not voted unanimously, we are looking at only another 75 basis points delivered in 2 separate hikes. So one in December, one in early February. And if it's 375, or even if it's 4, that's a lot lower than where we thought it was going to have to go during all that shenanigans at the end of September, early October, when it looked like they were going to have to go to nearly 6. Even if it is 4, even if it's a bit more than 4, that would still be a result. But we're looking at the moment at 375. Again, that's not going to come down quickly. That'll be left in place next year, and you really have to hope that they've done enough. I have to say, if I was in that committee, I'd do more than 375. I'm not convinced that's going to be enough, you know. I really hope they're right, because if they're wrong, the consequences politically as well as anything else are going to be pretty dreadful. They will have cocked it up, having had their first proper test in 25 years. They'll have cocked it up 9 months before the government's preferred general election date. That won't make them popular, will it? And the chances are, if this time next year we've still got inflation of 5%, and they decide they need to raise interest rates again, well, it's not going to be by another quarter, is it? You're going to have to really do the job properly. It will be another 1, 1.5, 2. And maybe at a time when everybody else is starting to cut their rates because they have done enough. That really wouldn't look very good. So we have to hope they've done enough, but prepare for the fact that they may not. In the meantime, I'm afraid what we have to enjoy is a period where we hope the inflation ebbs gradually away, that we learn from our mistakes and never let it out the bottle again, but also accept that decent economic growth, anything like what we had pre-COVID, is not going to return until this war in Ukraine and the consequences of that war get sorted out. Thank you very much.
There was Mark Beresford Smith, who was the head of economics at the HSBC. Really interesting listening to what he had to say on where things were going from his opinion. Recession into winter, possibly another one in 2024 if the government's got it wrong with the rate rises. And yeah, just very, very interesting guy and a really good way of putting his points across. So yeah, sounds like the war in Ukraine has to end and then things can hopefully get back on course. But the speaker after that was a land agent who was talking about BPS and the changes that are coming along down the road to that. Also discussing the grants that were going to be coming available and the ways in which we were going to have to change our farming practices, look at our businesses to make sure that we're still profitable after BPS. But unfortunately, I forgot to film any of that, so I apologise to that person. But the person that was on next after that was Young Farmer of the Year 2022, Matthew Nichols, who is basically managing an arable farm. He's got B&B breakfast pigs, and is an independent agronomist as well. He'd gone through some adversity to get to where he is. He lost both his parents, which he told us about in the speech, and he'd carried on going forward, got his head down into work, I think, to sort of like to get by that, and he's come out the other side with a great business, loads of cash flows. He really knew what was going on about with his business, especially just a young age as well. Just 29 years old now, and he's been at it a few years. So yeah, it was a great guy. I had a chat with him at the bar afterwards, and yeah, nice lad, top bloke. Right, you'll get to see him anyway. He's up next.
I'm 29 years old. I farm at Manor Farm in a village called Seamer, just outside of Teesside. Manor Farm is a 150-acre mixed farm around 300 feet above sea level. The land is silt loam to clay loam. As I say, it's a mixed farm with a varied arable rotation, B&B weaner pigs. I also use third-party graziers to bring other livestock onto the land, and alongside the farm I have developed a contracting business offering agronomy, spraying and direct drilling services.
It doesn't look like I got much of Matthew's speech there, but apologies for that, Matthew. What he was talking about was his using regenerative farming to lower his costs of production, and he was talking about the inflation price with fertiliser and things like that. So he was trying to keep his use of fertiliser down with some of the methods that he was using, so that he wasn't affected as much with the prices of inflation. That's sort of the gist of what he was saying there. And yeah, well done to him in the way he's carried himself forward and grown his business. On to our next speaker now.
You might all know him quite well. He's a York farmer and is appointed the show director of the Great Yorkshire Show in 2015, and he is from Woollis Grange, and a mixed arable rotation with a wedding venue. So I'd just like to welcome Charles to the stage.
He used to run 300 cattle on his 300-acre most of the year round. And in 1951, his vet bill for the year was £26. The first two Ferguson tractors, I know they would be paraffin tractors, he bought two for the total cost price of £735. I think he really treated himself because he enjoyed his shooting to buy himself a Land Rover for £607. I just wish he could be here to tell the story today. But finally, to all you people in the room, just be aware of inflation. Don't worry about it, but be aware. You'll be in control of your own businesses. Look for opportunities. There will be so many. And when they are there, take them. Take the chance, but look, listen, and learn. Work with a great team around you, whether that be family or by agents, but work with people that you can trust. And most of all, do not suffer in silence. There are plenty of people to contact, so if anybody is struggling in life, please remember that you have friends. And the Yorkshire Agricultural Society are brilliant at listening, so please just take that on board. Just finally, I would like to say two huge thank yous to two people in this room that give tireless and have given tireless work to this society. One is Kate Dale at the back, who organised Women in Farming. She has brought something totally different to the society, and without our women in the industry, none of us men would be where we are today. And the other is to Liz, who is sat down here, who started this organisation, and I think has done an incredible job. So, thank you.
Thank you for that, Charles. I think that was a brilliant roundup of your life farming in Yorkshire and how you've been not afraid to make changes along the way. I couldn't quite get past the 20p a pint and thought how lethal that would be at Harper if I was still there. And I also loved how you kept highlighting the importance of having a good team around you. You know, it just makes the job a whole lot easier. So we're just going to move on to the questions. So it's time to grill your panel. I'm looking at Andrew Wilson, wherever he is. I know you've got
bit of a different slant. But we were talking about food price inflation, and obviously at the moment consumers are and have to be fixed on the price of food with everything else that's going on. So my question is, there's a lot going on in the supply chain and whether things are distributed fairly, but how do we keep consumers who are faced with inflation engaged with the idea of buying British produce? And as I said, it's a bit of a different slant, so...
Because obviously they are going to worry about the price, and it's always nice to think that people will think about things other than price, and they will often tell you that they do think about things other than price, but when it comes to that moment of truth in the supermarket, no matter what they've told you, it will often be price that determines what they pick up, and that's not likely to change. It's not likely to change greatly, even if inflation comes down. That's just the way people are. They may have nice thoughts in their head, but then the budget constraints bite, or the feeling that if I spend less on my shopping, I can spend more on something else. That will always be very hard to overcome. So British produce has to be priced. What that suggests is that by and large, it not only has to be good, but it has to be price competitive.
I would say as well, it depends where you are. If you're in a rural community, it's easy to go out there and speak to people and explain, what you have to go through to produce that, how your costs have risen, and that's how it is. And some people will understand that. If any, their businesses might pass that cost on anyway, sort of thing. But if you were in the middle of a city somewhere, they don't care. They just want the cheapest thing possible. So I suppose it's trying to get. To me, it's talking to them. I know it might not help with inflation short term, but long term is looking at the education system and sort of hammering it home that way. So whether you could join in with the Farmer Time, I think it's called, that Tom Martin does, something like that, going into schools and speaking to people and start from the bottom again and explain.
I think Jeremy Clarkson's doing a fantastic job of that. He's got the whole sort of country captivated on what's going on with farming. Recently he spoke and he said that farmers aren't being paid enough. If you hear it from Jeremy Clarkson, it must be right. So it's great that he got someone like that being an advocate for farming. So, got any more questions? Now, without further ado, the bar is open, but whoever gets there first has to get me a double gin and tonic. So, thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight.
So that was a really good, interesting debate on inflation, and I think, it's just one of them things, isn't it? As farmers, we've just got to keep battling on and carry on with what we're doing. And I've got to battle on as well because of, it was a late night last night. This is going to turn into a late night, so I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope a few people have picked up a few pointers from some of the speakers because they know more about that sort of thing than I do, but hopefully I've picked a few things up to learn and have a think about and digest. Anyway, right, I'm tired, I'm going, bye bye.